The sun cast a merciless glare over Redemption Creek as Theodora Dawson stumbled through the dusty street, her wrists bound with rough rope that bit into her skin. Blood trickled down her temple where she'd been struck, and her once pristine blue dress was torn and soiled from being dragged behind a horse for nearly a mile. 3 men surrounded her, their faces twisted with cruel determination as they hauled her toward the town square. "This thieving woman stole from the Blackwater Mining Company," shouted the largest of the men, a brute named Jenkins who worked as an enforcer for the company. "And we're going to make an example of her." The year was 1878, and in this corner of Colorado territory, mining companies wielded more power than any law. Theodora had worked as a clerk in the company office, where she'd discovered ledgers detailing how the miners were being cheated of their rightful pay. When she'd tried to show the evidence to some of the workers, Jenkins and his men had caught her. "I didn't steal anything," Theodora cried out, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I only revealed the truth." A crowd began to gather as Jenkins and his men dragged her to the wooden platform in the center of town that usually served as a stage for announcements or the occasional hanging. Theodora's heart pounded against her ribs as she realized what they intended: a public humiliation, or worse. "Please," she begged, looking desperately at the townspeople who watched with mixed expressions of concern, curiosity, and fear. "Someone help me." Most averted their eyes. The mining company was the lifeblood of Redemption Creek. Going against them meant losing your livelihood, or worse. 30 lashes should teach her," Jenkins announced, producing a whip from his belt. "Unless someone wants to buy her debt. $500 for the money she cost us, or she gets the whip." A horrified murmur ran through the crowd, but no one stepped forward. $500 was more than most made in a year. Suddenly, the crowd parted as a tall figure strode forward. Theodora squinted against the sun, making out the silhouette of a man in a long duster coat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to danger, and the silver star pinned to his vest caught the sunlight. "That's enough." His voice was quiet, but carried across the now silent square. "This ain't your business, Vaughn," Jenkins spat. "Mining company matters." Vaughn Taylor stopped a few paces from the platform, his hand resting casually near the Colt revolver at his hip. He was the town's marshal, but everyone knew his jurisdiction was limited when it came to the mining companies. "Let her go," Vaughn said, his eyes never leaving Jenkins. "She owes a debt. $500 or 30 lashes. Your choice, Marshal." Vaughn's gaze flicked to Theodora, taking in her bloodied face and the terror in her eyes. Something passed between them, a moment of recognition, perhaps, or simply human decency in a place where such things were increasingly rare. "She's mine," Vaughn said, his voice carrying across the square. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "What did you say?" Jenkins demanded, his face reddening. "I said she's mine," Vaughn repeated, louder this time. "My wife. And you've laid hands on her." Theodora's eyes widened in shock. She'd never spoken more than a few words to the marshal, and certainly wasn't his wife. "That's a damn lie," Jenkins shouted. "Everyone knows you ain't married." Vaughn's hand moved to his gun. "Are you calling me a liar, Jenkins?" The crowd tensed. Everyone knew the marshal's reputation as the fastest draw in 3 counties. "We were married in Denver last month," Vaughn continued smoothly. "Kept it quiet on account of her working for the company. Now cut her loose before I forget I'm wearing this badge." Jenkins hesitated, looking from Vaughn to his 2 companions. They were armed, but the calculation was clear in his eyes: 3 against 1, but that one was Vaughn Taylor. "Fine," Jenkins spat, cutting Theodora's bonds with a knife. "But Blackwater won't forget this. She's fired, and you've made an enemy today." "Wouldn't be my first," Vaughn replied coldly. "Now get." The 3 men skulked away, pushing through the dispersing crowd. Vaughn stepped forward, offering Theodora his hand. She took it hesitantly, her legs shaking as she stepped down from the platform. "Thank you," she whispered. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, then winced as pain shot through her head. "I think so. My office is closer than the doctor's. I've got supplies there." He supported her with a gentle hand at her elbow, and they made their way through the parting crowd toward the marshal's office at the end of the main street. Theodora was acutely aware of the stares following them, the whispered comments about the marshal's supposed secret wife. Inside the small wooden building, Vaughn guided her to a chair and closed the door, shutting out the curious onlookers. The office was Spartan but neat: a desk with papers stacked in orderly piles, a gun rack on the wall, and a small stove in the corner with a coffee pot perched on top. Vaughn filled a basin with water from a pitcher and gathered some clean cloths from a drawer. "I'm sorry for the deception," he said, kneeling before her with the basin. "It seemed the quickest way to get you out of there." "You have nothing to apologize for," Theodora replied. "You saved me." She studied him as he gently cleaned the blood from her face. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 30, with keen gray eyes and a strong jawline softened by the beginning of a beard. His hands were calloused, but moved with surprising gentleness. "What really happened?" he asked. Theodora hesitated, then decided that if anyone could be trusted with the truth, it was the man who had just risked his reputation and possibly his life for her. "I found ledgers," she explained. "The company has been skimming from the miners' pay for years, nearly 30%. When I confronted Mr. Hollister about it, he fired me. Then I tried to tell some of the miners, and—" She gestured to her injuries. Vaughn nodded grimly. "Blackwater runs this town, but that doesn't give them the right to beat a woman." "What happens now?" Theodora asked quietly. "They'll know I'm not really your wife." A frown creased Vaughn's brow. "They might come after you again. Do you have family you can go to?" She shook her head. "My parents died in '73. I came west on my own." Vaughn was silent for a moment, wringing out the cloth in the now reddened water. "You could leave town. I can arrange passage on tomorrow's stage." The thought of running made Theodora's spine stiffen. And let them win? Let them keep stealing from people who can barely feed their families? A ghost of a smile touched Vaughn's lips. "I admire your courage, Miss Dawson, but courage won't stop a bullet." "How do you know my name?" "It's my job to know everyone in Redemption Creek," he replied, "though we haven't been properly introduced." "Vaughn Taylor." "Theodora Dawson," she said, accepting his outstretched hand. "But most people call me Thea." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something neither could yet name. "Well, Miss Thea," Vaughn said, standing and disposing of the bloody water, "we have a problem. As far as the town is concerned, you're now my wife. If that story falls apart too quickly, Jenkins and his men might decide to finish what they started." Thea felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing improper," Vaughn assured her quickly. "But it might be safer if you stayed here for a while. I have rooms upstairs. You can take the bed. I'll use the cot down here." She studied him, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive, but found only genuine concern. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. "You're risking a lot." Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the last light of day filtered through dusty glass. "My sister worked for a mining company in Montana. When she found out they were cheating the miners, she spoke up too." His jaw tightened. No one stood up for her. Understanding dawned on Thea. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "But I swore I'd never stand by and watch it happen again." Thea nodded slowly. "Then I accept your offer, Marshal Taylor. Though I'm not sure what the town will think of me moving in with my husband on the day they learn we're married." The corner of Vaughn's mouth quirked up in a rare smile. People in Redemption Creek love to talk. Might as well give them something worth talking about. Over the next few days, Thea settled into an uneasy routine. During the day, she remained in Vaughn's quarters above the marshal's office, reading books from his small collection or helping to organize his chaotic paperwork. At night, they would share a simple meal, during which Vaughn would tell her about his day disputes settled, drunks locked up, news from neighboring towns. The pretense of their marriage spread quickly through Redemption Creek. Some ladies from the church brought a basket of food for the newlyweds, their curious eyes taking in every detail of the marshal's quarters. Vaughn handled these visitors with surprising grace, thanking them for their kindness while firmly escorting them out before they could ask too many questions. On the fourth evening, as they sat by the small stove sharing a rabbit stew Vaughn had prepared, he brought up the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Jenkins and his men left town yesterday," he said, breaking off a piece of cornbread. "Headed to the main Blackwater office in Denver. They'll be back, though." Thea set down her spoon. With reinforcements, I imagine. Vaughn nodded. Most likely. Blackwater doesn't like loose ends. What about the evidence I found? The ledgers. Without the actual books, it's your word against theirs, Vaughn said. And in a company town, their word carries more weight. Thea finished for him. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I need to get those ledgers back. Vaughn looked up sharply. That's too dangerous. The miners deserve to know they're being robbed, Thea insisted. Some of their families are starving while Blackwater executives feast in Denver. And you think getting yourself killed will help them? I don't plan on getting killed, Thea replied with more confidence than she felt. But I need to do something. I can't hide up here forever. Vaughn studied her face, his expression a mixture of admiration and frustration. You remind me of my sister, he said finally. Stubborn as a mule. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one, he muttered, but there was no heat in his words. After a moment, he sighed. If we were to get those ledgers, what would you do with them? Thea felt a spark of hope. Send them to the territorial governor. Or perhaps a newspaper in Denver, somewhere beyond Blackwater's reach. Vaughn considered this. The company office will be guarded. Not at night, Thea said quickly. The night watchman always falls asleep by midnight. I've seen him when I worked late. You've been thinking about this, Vaughn observed. I've had little else to do but think, she admitted. Vaughn was silent for a long moment, absently turning his coffee cup in his hands. Finally, he said, if we're going to do this, we do it my way. No risks. At the first sign of trouble, we leave, with or without the ledgers. Thea felt her heart leap. You don't think I'd let you go alone, do you? He shook his head. Besides, if anyone sees the marshal's wife breaking into the company office, my reputation would be ruined. We wouldn't want that, Thea said, unable to hide her smile. That night, they planned their mission. The company office was a 2-story building on the edge of town, with the ledgers likely kept in the main office on the second floor. Vaughn would create a distraction to draw away the night watchman, while Thea would slip in through the back and retrieve the evidence. As they finalized their plan, Thea became increasingly aware of Vaughn, the intensity in his gray eyes as he sketched a rough map of the building, the way his hand occasionally brushed hers as they bent over the table, the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him. Despite the circumstances, she found herself drawn to this quiet, principled man. The next night, under cover of darkness, they made their way to the company office. Vaughn was dressed all in black, his badge left behind, a bandana ready to pull over the lower half of his face. Thea wore men's trousers and a dark shirt borrowed from Vaughn, her hair tucked under a cap. Remember, Vaughn whispered as they crouched in the shadows behind the building. At the first sign of trouble, we leave, Thea finished. I remember. He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face for a moment longer than necessary. Be careful, he said softly, then slipped away toward the front of the building. Thea waited, counting her rapid heartbeats until she heard a commotion from the street, the sound of breaking glass and Vaughn's voice, disguised and slurred, shouting about a lost bet. The night watchman's annoyed response followed, and then footsteps moving away from the building. Quickly, Thea moved to the back door. It was locked, as expected, but the window beside it had a broken latch, a detail she'd noticed during her employment. She eased it open and slipped inside, finding herself in the storage room. The office was eerily quiet as she made her way through the familiar space, guided by shafts of moonlight through the windows. She climbed the stairs carefully, wincing at every creak of the wooden steps. The main office door was unlocked. The watchman rarely bothered with interior doors. Inside, Thea made directly for the large oak cabinet where the ledgers were kept. To her dismay, it was locked. She tried the desk drawers, searching for a key, aware that every passing second increased their risk of discovery. In the bottom drawer, she found a ring of keys. The third one she tried unlocked the cabinet. The ledgers were exactly where she remembered them, thick-bound books with dates marked on their spines. She grabbed the 2 most recent ones and tucked them into the satchel she'd brought. As she turned to leave, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. Thea froze, her heart pounding. The door handle turned slowly. Instead of the night watchman, however, it was Vaughn who slipped inside, his bandana pulled down around his neck. We need to go, he whispered urgently. Jenkins is back with company. Did they see you? Thea asked, clutching the satchel. No, but they're headed this way. Did you get what we came for? She patted the satchel. Yes. Then let's. Voices from outside interrupted him. Through the window, they could see several men approaching the building, Jenkins among them. Back door, Vaughn decided, taking Thea's hand. They hurried down the stairs as quietly as possible, but as they reached the storage room, the front door opened. Voices filled the building. Jenkins and at least two others. Hide, Vaughn mouthed, pulling Thea behind a stack of crates. They crouched in the darkness, hardly daring to breathe as heavy footsteps climbed the stairs. A moment later, there was a shout of alarm. Someone's been here. The ledgers are gone. Search the building. Jenkins ordered. Vaughn drew his revolver. When I create a diversion, run for the window, he whispered in Thea's ear. Get to the livery stable. My horse is there. Ride east along the creek. What about you? Thea whispered back. I'll be right behind you. Before she could protest, Vaughn stood and fired 2 shots into the ceiling. Shouts of surprise echoed from upstairs, followed by the thunder of boots on the stairs. Go, Vaughn urged, pushing her toward the window. Thea scrambled through the opening, the satchel clutched tightly to her chest. Behind her, she heard Vaughn fire again, then the crash of something heavy being toppled. She ran through the darkness, her heart pounding in her ears, praying that Vaughn would escape. The livery stable loomed ahead, its doors standing open. Inside, Vaughn's bay gelding nickered softly as she approached. With shaking hands, she saddled the horse, listening for any sign of pursuit. Just as she was about to mount, a figure appeared in the doorway. Thea, Vaughn's voice was a welcome relief. You made it, she gasped as he hurried toward her. Barely. They'll be combing the town within minutes. He took the reins from her. Can you ride? Yes, but no time. He cut her off, lifting her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. Hold on. He kicked the horse into motion, and they galloped out of the stable and down a side street, away from the company office. Behind them, shouts and the occasional gunshot echoed through the night. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following the winding creek eastward until the sounds of pursuit faded and the lights of Redemption Creek disappeared behind them. Finally, Vaughn slowed the horse to a walk. I think we lost them, he said, his breath warm against Thea's ear. She became acutely aware of his arms around her, his chest solid against her back. What now? She asked, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead. We can rest there for the night, then make for Silverton tomorrow. I know the sheriff there. He's no friend to Blackwater. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin, long abandoned by whatever ranch had once used it, but it offered shelter from the night. Vaughn tended to the horse while Thea gathered wood for a small fire. Inside, the cabin was sparse: a rough-hewn table, a couple of chairs, and a narrow bed with a straw mattress. Vaughn got the fire going while Thea examined their precious cargo. It's all here, she said, leafing through the ledgers. Every transaction, every payment. They've been stealing from hundreds of miners. Vaughn joined her at the table, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned in to look at the numbers. This is enough to cause real trouble for Blackwater, he agreed. Thea turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how close he was. In the flickering firelight, his features seemed softer, the usual stern set of his jaw relaxed. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. His eyes met hers. I told you, I couldn't stand by and watch what happened to my sister happen again. Is that the only reason? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Vaughn was silent for a moment, his gaze dropping to her lips and then back to her eyes. No, he admitted. Not anymore. The confession hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Thea's heart raced as Vaughn slowly raised his hand to her face, his fingers gentle as they brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Thea, he began, his voice rougher than usual. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. For a moment, he seemed surprised, then his arms encircled her, drawing her closer as he deepened the kiss. The ledgers and their danger were forgotten as they surrendered to the feelings that had been building since that first day in the town square. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you standing up to those men, he confessed. Thea smiled. Even with blood on my face and my dress torn? Especially then, he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Your courage took my breath away. They spent the night talking by the fire, sharing the stories of their lives. Vaughn's childhood in Missouri, his years as a Union soldier during the war despite his young age, the loss of his sister that had driven him to seek justice as a lawman. Thea told him of her parents, Eastern educators who had instilled in her a sense of right and wrong, her decision to come west after their deaths, seeking independence in a land where women rarely had any. As dawn broke, they reluctantly prepared to continue their journey. The ride to Silverton would take most of the day, and they needed to reach the sheriff before Jenkins and his men realized where they had gone. What will you do after? Vaughn asked as they mounted the horse. After we deliver the ledgers? Thea considered the question. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Find work somewhere, I suppose. Somewhere far from Blackwater's reach. Vaughn was quiet for a moment, then said, You could come back to Redemption Creek. After this is over, after Blackwater is exposed. As your wife? Thea asked, only half joking. His arms tightened around her waist. That was a lie I told to save you, he said, his voice low. But it doesn't have to stay a lie. Thea's heart skipped a beat. Vaughn Taylor, are you proposing to me while we're fugitives on the run? I suppose I am, he said, a smile in his voice. Though I'd planned to do it properly, with a ring and on one knee. She turned in the saddle to look at him. Ask me again when this is over, she said softly. When we're both safe. He nodded, his eyes full of promise. I will. They reached Silverton by late afternoon, dusty and exhausted but unharmed. Sheriff Daniels, an old friend of Vaughn's from his days as a territorial marshal, received them warmly and was appalled by the evidence in the ledgers. This is serious, he said, examining the falsified accounts. Blackwater's been untouchable for years, but this. He looked up at them. This could change everything. Daniels arranged for the ledgers to be transported to Denver by trusted deputies, along with Thea's sworn statement. He also sent telegrams to neighboring towns, alerting them to watch for Jenkins and his men. You two should stay here until we hear from Denver, he advised. Blackwater will be looking for you. For 2 weeks, Thea and Vaughn remained in Silverton, staying in rooms above the general store owned by Danielle's sister. The waiting was difficult, but they found comfort in each other's company, their relationship deepening with each passing day. Finally, a telegram arrived from the territorial governor. Blackwater Mining Company was under investigation, its assets frozen. Warrants had been issued for the arrest of several executives, including Jenkins. It's over, Vaughn said as they stood on the boardwalk outside the telegraph office, the paper clutched in his hand. You did it, Thea. She shook her head. We did it. He took her hands in his. Does this mean you'll come back to Redemption Creek with me? Is that still what you want? She asked, searching his face. In answer, Vaughn dropped to one knee, right there on the boardwalk, drawing gasps from passers-by. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold ring. Theodora Dawson, from the moment I saw you in that town square, I knew my life would never be the same. Will you marry me? For real this time? Tears filled Thea's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They were married in Silverton the next day, with Sheriff Daniels giving the bride away and his sister serving as witness. It was a simple ceremony, but filled with more joy than either had thought possible when they'd first met under such desperate circumstances. 2 months later, they returned to Redemption Creek. The town had changed in their absence. With Blackwater's corruption exposed, many miners had organized into a cooperative, purchasing the mine themselves with loans from sympathetic banks in Denver. Others had moved on, seeking new opportunities. Vaughn resumed his duties as marshal, now with the full backing of the territorial government. Thea, with her experience in accounts, was hired by the miners' cooperative to manage their books, ensuring that every worker received his fair share. Their home, a small but comfortable cabin at the edge of town, became known for its open door and warm hearth. Former Blackwater employees who had been unaware of the corruption, miners and their families, travelers passing through all were welcome at the Taylor table. On their first anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Vaughn presented Thea with a leather-bound journal. What's this? She asked, opening it to find blank pages. For our story, he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. How a brave woman stood up for justice, and how a marshal claimed her as his wife to save her from a whipping. Thea laughed. That's quite a beginning. The best stories often have unusual beginnings, Vaughn replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. And how does our story end? She asked, leaning into his embrace. Vaughn smiled, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. It doesn't, he said simply. The best stories never truly end. As if to underscore his words, Thea took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, where the first signs of new life were just beginning to show. Vaughn's eyes widened in understanding, then filled with wonder. Truly, he whispered. Thea nodded, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had risked everything for her, and for the family they were building together. Our story is just beginning, she said softly. And as the last light of day faded from the sky, Marshal Vaughn Taylor held his real wife, close, marveling at how the words he had spoken in desperate deception that day in the town square had become the most profound truth of his life. She was his, and he was hers, and together they had found a love worth fighting for.